We want to continue to pray for Mr. Floyd's family at this time. Joining me now for insight is the Director of Criminal Justice at Cedarville University, Dr. Patrick Oliver. Dr. Oliver, thank you so much for coming on the show. By the way, you also served for 20-plus years in law enforcement. What are general police policy guidelines regarding use of force?
Any use of force policy should indicate that a police officer or officers should use no more force than needed to effect the arrest. So not any more than is required to effect an arrest.
What does the case law say about the use of force?
There are two key cases that address use of force in the United States. The first one is Tennessee versus Garner from 1985, and the second one is Graham versus Connor from 1989. And Tennessee versus Garner talks about guidelines for shooting a fleeing felon, that you can't shoot a fleeing felon unless that person presents a high degree of risk to the individual or someone else. And Graham versus Connor basically gives some guidelines for using force. It really comes down to three key questions. What is the seriousness of the crime? What kind of risk does that person present to the officer or others? Or is that person attempting to flee? So those are the two key seminal cases that guide use of force for all law enforcement across the United States.
Should the 4 officers who have already been arrested been formally charged? Should they have been fired, perhaps?
I think the termination is probably too soon. That may shock a lot of people by saying that, but police officers have due process, and they need to go through the due process before they make a termination decision. It seems like it was so fast. I wonder if the Minneapolis city had the opportunity to do that. And second, it's up to the prosecutor when charges are filed and what charges are filed. So if you just look at the video clip, it certainly seems that these officers should have some disciplinary action, probably termination, and it does appear that these officers should be charged in criminal court.
What can we, sir, as a society and police officers across the country learn from this incident?
Well, one of the big things that's talked about right now is de-escalation. You know, de-escalate a situation and not have to use force in the first place instead of heightening the situation. So making sure officers understand use of force policies, they get training on that policy, and their supervision and guidelines of that policy. Use of force is something that every law enforcement agency should train on every single year.
And how can things like this be prevented moving forward?
It really comes down to who you hire. It comes down to policy guidelines. It comes down to training on those policy guidelines, supervision, and then holding people accountable when violations occur.